You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And, of course, our apologies to our live audience. We're like a half hour late going on. We got a new audio interface that we're testing, so it always seems to be something with us lately. Either we're causing the technical issues or technical issues just befall us for some weird reason. I don't know. But you know what? We're here now. We're here and we're ready to talk some Star Wars. It's pretty interesting, this article that you actually ran across, because this is something that we've been talking about to various levels. And I'll just sort of set this up a little bit, because there's a couple of things that this article addresses. There's like three basic things. Well, really two. I guess three. One is with the release of Revenge of the Sith, they're saying, listen, we hope that people realize that like a good straight up drama would be good to actually have in the Star Wars universe. And, that's something that I could get behind, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that it's talking about, too, is either going back to the Old Republic or, maybe making movies out of the expanded universe books. Or if you're going to do the Old Republic, do it based on what was covered in the expanded universe. Something that wasn't in the article, which I can understand. You and I, primarily me, have talked about, I would actually be fine if eventually they rebooted even the original trilogy. Because I see that, really, when you're trying to, it's almost like if you're trying to fix a roof. You have the original roof, and then you're trying to add to it, you're trying to fix it. Eventually, you just got to replace the entire roof, so it has all the continuity and it doesn't leak. And eventually, I see that happening, even with the original trilogy. But as far as what they should do next, that's basically what this article talks about. And honestly, it is good that they don't mess with the original trilogy or even deal with the Skywalkers right now. I think that's the main thing that it was talking about. So was that pretty much what you were getting out of this too?
Yeah, I mean, I know they were talking about, different places maybe where you can start to reboot, and some of the concepts and ideas that they had as far as the Old Republic, and kind of, getting, we've always talked about getting away from the Skywalker saga and kind of telling stories around that or outside of that. And I think that's needed. I think they're trying to do that. I think it's just been poorly done, honestly. It's just their execution is lackluster, to be nice about it. Um, but and it was funny because I was talking to David earlier, and he was, saying that they do need to reboot the. He basically was saying like, oh, you can go back to the prequels and just redo all that and just kind of start from that era and then kind of just work your way up to Return of the Jedi. I don't think so, personally.
No, not at all.
I think that there's some things that like you can. I think the originals should be, or the George Lucasfilm should stand the test of time. And then I think if you want to reboot anything, I would say you reboot the sequel trilogy. Um, how to do that? I mean, in the perfect world for me, I would just say and I hate to say it because outside of the blunder that Disney created, they do have good actors and actresses. Like Daisy Ridley. I don't have a problem with Daisy Ridley. I don't have a problem with John Boyega or um, Oscar Isaac. I don't have a problem with any of those actors. It's just the story and the execution wasn't up to par. And I almost wish they could just redo the sequel trilogy and just do something else besides what they actually ended up doing. that would be my own thing. I would say is if you were to reboot anything, I think that's how that's what you would need to reboot. And then if you go far back enough, like we talked about the Old Republic, then you could tell those brand new stories and things like that. But I don't think there's any problem using your roof analogy. I don't think there's any problem with the original section of the roof.
Yeah, I disagree. I think there's a huge problem. I think if you look at all the plot leaks, if you look at all the discontinuity, it's all coming from the original trilogy. It's coming from that because he had technical limitations. He couldn't tell the story he really wanted to tell. You know, you could if you actually rebooted from the original trilogy on out, now you can have Ewan McGregor coming back as Obi-Wan. There's your continuity there. You could actually write the Force, the lightsabers, everything the way that it's supposed to. It's been almost 50 years. And I'm not even saying to do that as the next thing. I'm talking about another 20 or 30 years down the line. In fact, going to David's point, by the time it becomes relevant to actually start to reboot that, maybe you do reboot everything. But at least the original, because you just had a lot of problems because he just didn't have the technology to do what he wanted to do. And then, of course, he's making it like, oh, lightsabers were, super heavy. And in no other place in the Star Wars universe, sequels, prequels, EU, anywhere, it's almost like that sticks out as a sore thumb. And the reason why people are so beholden to it is because they're so well made. Look, I'm the original generation. If anybody would be
Hmm.
against it, it would be my generation. But I'm at the point where, once you've expanded this franchise, you can begin to fix a lot of those plot holes. You can begin to repair that. But I'm not talking about, like, as it relates to this article, I don't think I agree with them, actually, that they need to stay far away from the Skywalker saga and either do like another, a new set of characters that could certainly take place within the common universe that we know, anywhere between, say, I don't know, the High Republic all the way up to the sequels, but just focus on a different set of characters. Or, yeah, they go all the way back to the Old Republic and establish some things because, quite frankly, you and I might not even be alive to see the reboot of the prequels or original trilogy, because I don't think that that's necessarily where they should go right away.
Well, so I, I I hear you. I think there's some problems with the idea of trying to do something within the main trilogy because the only way I can see that working is if it took place maybe in the unknown regions or in the area of the galaxy where it's like I said, like an unknown, like no one is out there. That because if you have them even relatively close to that, it causes another problem because all right, well, Vader and the Emperor thought that they vanquished all the Jedi. I mean, of course, Luke was supposed to be, and maybe there were some other Force users around, sure, but they weren't causing up enough disturbance in the Force, shall we say, for them to go investigate that. And if they did, or if they were, it's like if they were that powerful enough where they have this whole trilogy, you would think that would pop up on Palpatine and Vader's radar. So that to me, that's kind of a contradiction in a way to the
Yes and
original
no.
story.
Yes and no, because here's what was really strange about that was during the prequel era, Palpatine was blocking the light side, which is
Hmm.
why the Jedi were, able to be vanquished, basically.
Right.
But a little known fact, everybody forgets that Yoda, being on Dagobah, was actually actively blocking the dark side.
Hmm.
And so you could conceivably have some things that, Vader and Palpatine wouldn't necessarily sense, or maybe they just don't care. I mean, again, I think that you have to be careful about what you do, right? Because I know what you're saying. It's like, okay, well, if you put it in between, like, let's say episode 3 and 7, as soon as you bring in Force users, you're gonna have that problem.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what we ran into with Ahsoka. Because when
Well, even
Ahsoka popped
before
back
that,
up,
The Mandalorian with Ahsoka, right? I mean, it's kind of like,
well, that's what I mean. Like when we're talking about like when Ahsoka popped up in the Mandalorian,
ah,
that's what I mean. Like, okay, well, because Luke was like, well, where were you doing all this? Like, okay, you saw I was out here, fighting for my life, and the whole, the galaxy was and everybody was doing their thing. Like, you knew my father, you were his Padawan. Like, yeah, I could have used your help, and of course they kind of covered it up like, well, that was a journey you need to go on your own, and blah 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 blah. I mean, that worked in that scenario for Ahsoka, but if you are talking about other Force users who are having this whole thing going on, that if you want to consider like a new trilogy, you think that's and Palpatine is always searching into the unknown regions, and because he could sense that there was something coming. Like, you thinking he would pick up on that?
if it was strong enough,
Well, that's what I'm
because
saying. If you're
you
going to
got to
have a whole
remember there was,
trilogy, it has to be strong enough.
well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on, because again, it could be one of those things that, I mean, for a long time, even though Palpatine, you know, he knew that certain Force users were running around, he wasn't necessarily trying to hunt them down because he didn't consider them a threat.
Yeah, but he still sent out his inquisitors, and like he might know
Right
it
afterwards,
wasn't.
yeah, but I mean, during the time of like the original trilogy,
But
again,
that's because they were all pretty much wiped off. I mean, the planet. I mean,
right,
that's
and
why.
that's the thing. You had some powerful Force users still there. Nobody cared because there wasn't really much they could do. I mean, it's either they're gonna eventually try to face Palpatine and Vader, in which case they would probably lose, or they just don't. And they live their lives somewhat. But it is an issue though, because they did establish this. Now, the expanded universe did have a lot of books that were dedicated to between the time of episodes 3 and 4. Of course, this is all before even the prequel trilogy was done. But in some cases it overlapped. But for the most part, there was a good chunk of it though that was, obviously written before 99. And they were able to get around it pretty well. I mean, when you look at the fact that the galaxy has trillions upon trillions of inhabitants, you know,
Mhm.
it's almost like saying that even an earthly thing, unless you're dealing with like some political thriller, you can't do any stories, that don't involve governments and stuff. But of course, the flip side of that is, I mean, and it goes back to our discussion about what makes Star Wars, right? It's like, well, what ingredients do you have to have in a Star Wars film to satisfy the audience? You're not going to do like some, struggling mom and her daughter just trying to make it through life or something, like
Mhm.
some just straight up drama. I mean, you're not going to do that. I mean, you can, and even the shows that tried to stay away from the Jedi and the Force and all that, they did until a certain point. But I argue, because one of the things I didn't mention that was in the article too was the fact that they wanted to focus on the bounty hunters. And then, by proxy, you can do the criminal organizations as well. Crimson Dawn, that whole thing.
Pikes. Yeah. All
Yeah,
those. Yeah.
right. Pikes. So, I mean, you could, like, the first season of The Mandalorian was pretty much force free. I mean, other than Grogu.
Mhm.
And then, Andor season 1 was pretty much force free. Now, obviously, in 2, they got to tie it into Rogue One. So, yeah, they're going to bring in Vader a little bit. They're going to bring in some of those elements that, of course, inform us of the whole Rogue One situation and the plot and all that. But it does show, though, that you can create very interesting television or presumably films within the Star Wars universe that maybe doesn't necessarily rely on that macro storyline. You could get very much into the micro. I mean, Skeleton Crew more or less proved that too.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think if you're gonna do that, but I think you have to somewhat reestablish like the core of what Star Wars is to a certain point. Like at some point, you're, and like I said, I don't have a problem with these other stories like Skeleton Crew or things like that. But people are still going to need to see the Force. People are still need to going to see the lightsabers. People are still going to need to see that because that is the brand. That's part of the big brand of Star Wars. Um, so I think that if we're going to reboot something, to me, I still stand on the sequel trilogy. I think that's the biggest failure of the
Yeah.
franchise itself, and I think they really need to fix that. And they're even the things that they've tried to do around that with Ahsoka or Mandalorian to a certain degree. Like okay, seeing Luke, whether it be you know CG and he's coming back and he's wrecking shop. Okay, like that did a lot for the fan base. That gave everyone hope. Like okay, maybe Star Wars is getting back on the right track because they gave us this 10-minute thing where we like for 10 minutes we were like, oh my god, yes, this is so
See, we don't need
fulfilling.
much.
Exactly, right. And I think that was you know the hope that we had. And then you start getting other projects and you're just like, oh boy, here we go back again. And those are the moments and those are the things that I think are missing in Star Wars, is that we don't have enough of those moments. We don't have enough of those, like when we came out of Rogue One, and well, we were going in to see Rogue One, and like people were just talking about once again the last 10 minutes of Rogue One, that whole moment when Vader was just like wrecking shop. It was just. But even in the other moments where we saw Vader, and it wasn't just the fact that it was Vader, but it felt like okay, this is what we know. This is what we remember. And we all enjoy Rogue One, don't get me wrong. But having that element of Vader in there was just like the icing on the cake.
Right. But here's the thing that and this is where I think that, because if you look at the sequel, there's a lot of, I mean, yeah, there are issues with them. And it's funny because even this article brought up the fact that, well, some fans feel it's because they didn't plan it out properly, which, we've
Hmm.
been screaming for years. But here's the thing that I think would be kind of a good takeaway as well, and that's this. The fact that they didn't do any kind of content, whether it's television, film, whatever, from like say Return of the Jedi all the way up. I think people could have, like in the whole instance with Luke Skywalker, because that's really the biggest problem. I mean, I actually think that other than Han Solo dying, I
Hmm.
think people were pretty much happy with this characterization. It was Luke
Well,
that
huh?
was
Oh yeah,
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 it was the big problem was Luke.
yeah.
But if you had content that gave us that heroic grandmaster similar to the EU Luke, and then you had made a bunch of projects, and then The Last Jedi came out, like, okay, hey, you know, temple burns down, Kylo turns, now this is where he's at. I think people would have accepted that. The problem is, this is what we
Yeah.
get, like, after we've
30
waited for
years.
30 years.
Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And I mean, I think that people are like, wait a minute, really? All
What a
right,
bunch
so
of junk.
yeah. So Ted basically says, I'm with Daryl. Reboot the sequel for sure. Reestablish Luke as a great Jedi who rebuilds the Knights, not someone who doubted his nephew to the point he pondered killing him and ruined it all. And that's basically what
Hmm.
we're
Yeah.
just, we're catching up to Ted now, in the conversation. And that's basically it. I think if you had content that was building
Yeah.
up to that point, people would have accepted some of the decisions. And of course, a lot of the reason why the sequel failed is simply because this wasn't planned out properly. It was rushed. There were just a lot of production elements too that caused it. But And the problem is, if you try to do it, it would confuse it. See, and this is why I always go back to the original trilogy as well, because what you would have to do is you have to recast Han, Luke, and Leia. You have to recast them so you can do, and if you do it correctly, you could use the same actors from making stuff happening between episode 3 and 4 all the way on through to the sequels.
The problem is the acting, right? And the acting, do you keep the story the same? Like, if you reboot it, do you keep the story the same?
Oh yeah, I would. I mean, I would,
Okay.
at least the prequels in the original trilogy, absolutely.
Okay.
Here's what
So
I
you
would
got
do. I mean, if it
okay.
were me, I would basically reboot the prequels and the original trilogy, but fix everything. Like, I would fix the problems with the prequel trilogy. The problem with the prequel trilogy wasn't really the story, it was the execution. It
Mhm.
was the overuse and over-reliance on, the whole digital thing because it was brand new. And Lucas was like, "Oh, I could finally do this." And so he
Mhm.
overdid it. And then, of course, there's like a couple of things here and there that you could patch up plot-wise, too. Then you move to the original trilogy, keep the same story, but now, again, you can fix a lot of the plot issues. You can fix a lot of the things that have basically chained writers, filmmakers, whatever, for years because it's canon and you can't get around it. And so you can even flesh out a more complete story that way. And then you can start to go through the sequel trilogy. And what I would do is just do the Timothy Zahn episode 7, 8, and 9.
Mhm.
I mean, if you did all of that, it would be great. And like I've said, they may do that and I might be dead, and that makes me mad. I've been at this since the beginning. I deserve
Right.
to see a remade, trilogy with good effects and, everything done right and good actors and all that. But, the reality is I probably won't be. I mean, if I'm lucky, it's like, look, it's going to be whatever it's going to be. I mean, it's not like I'm 80, right? No offense to my mom,
Right.
she watches. But, it's I mean, granted, maybe if I take care of myself well, I got like maybe 30 years left. Wow. Actually, the first time I
Put
really
that
thought about that.
right, exactly.
That's,
As soon as you said it, you're like, that's all I have
I
left.
might need a little moment here. That's a kind of a sobering thing actually to think about, but
Well,
I mean,
it's funny because you and I used to always joke about that. Like when we were younger, like, man, what if we die before like 7, 8, and 9 get made?
oh
You
yeah, I
know,
know. I
and
know.
we never get to see how it ends. And like some way, we kind of wish we did.
You know
But
what? Exactly. It's like, oh, you know what? Maybe death would have been merciful. I don't know. David does join us. He says, hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day and Rebooted. It's trash at this point at the reset button. Kind of goes back to what you said you guys were talking about. But yeah, that's
yeah,
what I would do. I would basically reboot the prequels and the original trilogy and just fix the issues, fix the plot holes, and make
okay,
it to where you're keeping the lore intact, but you're basically freeing people. You're not necessarily shackling them in a lot of cases because the original trilogy is the mothership. It was all technical limitations. Because again, it's like, how many times have we had to explain stuff? Because, it's like, okay, there's these things that happen out of universe. And it's like, all right, we know what the reality is, but you have to find an in-universe explanation. And fortunately, Star Wars fans have gotten really good at doing that. And it's great. And again, it's because here's my thing. It's the same way that I look at when artists want to do these like re-recordings and stuff of their albums. Because
hmm
you see that a lot. You see artists will, re-record an album because, they want the publishing, right? So they basically, they'll do a re-recording. Well, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be better than the original. And if it even if it is, it's because the people had the original in their head so much, it's hard for them to get their head around it. Now, movies are a little bit different usually, but here's the thing that I say about the album thing, and I would say the same thing about any movies. As long as the original is still available, then I don't care what they do. Where I would have a slight issue is if they say they reboot the original trilogy, but then they make it unavailable. Well, that wouldn't be good. Because even lore-wise, the original trilogy from a filmmaking standpoint still stands as like a work of art, right? I mean, you don't want to just erase it. You're just creating really more of an alternate version of it. And something that will align with the rest of what it is you're doing. And if they pick age-appropriate actors and they really plan this out, they could, every couple of years or whatever, make movies, stuff that happens in between episodes, reboot the prequels if they want, and then make the stuff in between 3 and 4 and, then go on and on.
Well, that was going to be my next question because the acting, right? So you got me so far. I'm willing to go with you on the fixing the plot holes.
Like we're actually negotiating, really doing this.
I know, right?
It's like, all right, I'm with you. I'll concede this. We're going to do this. It's fine.
Right, as if we have like keys to Disney.
Yeah, as if we're going to be doing this tomorrow. All right, great. We'll start pre-production tomorrow then. Let's do it.
All right. But okay, so, and this is the question because, and that's what I've been doing. I was researching the ages. So Alden Ehrenreich right now is 35. Billy Lord, let's just say she plays her mother, Princess Leia. She's 32. Sebastian Stan right now is 42. So I'm assuming that these aren't the actors he will want to do
You can't.
this.
You
can't. Exactly.
You can't do it. You have to. That's what I'm saying is that you have to actually. Now, you could still, again, because this happens in other franchises all the time. Look at James Bond. That's like the perfect one, actually. They're constantly going all over the place with that. Because people know the timeline relatively well over the last 50 years or 60 or whatever it's been, that you could plug in and say, oh, well, now we're going to do, James Bond here and we're going to do that. But, oh, we need an age-appropriate actor because, we can't have, like Pierce Brosnan doing a prequel.
Yeah.
So we got to get somebody else, right? So you could do that with Star Wars. You could plug in. You could actually simultaneously, and again, you can make the argument that it would get somewhat convoluted, and that is up for debate because it would. But you could conceivably reboot a lot of the projects coming up, but still plug stuff in. Like if you wanted to tell something that happened, like Mandalorian season 7 or something. Right? You could still do that while you're doing the rest of it. Because again, it's just, you're telling stories. But that's where it gets dangerous, and that goes back to my first argument where they should just reboot it, start from scratch, go from beginning, and just keep that going. And then if they want to make stuff in between, just make unrelated Skywalker saga stuff. Like nothing, like do the Old Republic, do the High Republic, do stories that take place outside of, that are really micro. Like one of the things that you and I loved about Andor is the fact that you get to see the Empire, in the mid-level with all these mid-officers, like Cyril, like Deidre, like all these people. You could do something like that, a whole, trilogy based on some sort of like little adventure and the political intrigue and all that, and never even get to your Palpatines and Vaders and Lukes and Leias and all that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we knew it's been proven that, and we've seen that it can be done. I guess my thing is, I don't know who could bring the magic, because that was a thing, man. It's like the chemistry that you had with Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill was undeniable, and you get people like, okay, like Alden Ehrenreich did a great job as Han Solo, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean he can work in an ensemble with, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you get like, using a football or a basketball, and me and my sports analogies. Like sometimes you have great players, but they don't, like, they're great individuals, but they're not great on teams.
Right.
Because they feel like they have to be the star of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, that's what made, our '04 Detroit Pistons work so well, is because everyone played their role and everybody, understood what the other person brought to the table and they maximized that. So even an ensemble cast where you have to have a really good, I mean, fortunate enough, if you got Ewan McGregor, one, he's already been established as Obi-Wan, true. And if you wait long enough, I mean, he'll probably be as old as Alec Guinness, but
He already basically is.
So
that's the thing that's scary, is he pretty much is. Alec Guinness was actually, like, he played a 60-some-year-old character, but he was only in his 50s when he did it.
Really?
Yeah. Ewan
Wow, he
McGregor
looked
basically
a whole lot older than that.
Yeah, well, that's everybody did back then. That's the thing that's so funny. It's like those show, like there was this, I forgot who it was, but they show Wilford Brimley from Cocoon, and he was only like 50. And it's like, I mean, and then they showed like a 50-year-old now. I mean, I don't know. It's like people,
Exactly.
they're looking younger, older.
Exactly. Well, I mean, yeah. Now that people aren't smoking everywhere, and
Yeah, but I mean, it's a trade-off because, the food was better back then. You didn't have as much, toxic chemicals and all this stuff. So, I mean, it's like a trade-off, but who knows? Maybe all this plastic that we're ingesting is preserving us and, giving us some sort of weird youthful glow.
Yeah,
all right. David.
Rubber-made Tupperware.
David says, if you start with the Purge of the Jedi and earn back the respect, it'll lay the foundation and give you time to cast a magical cast. The other thing that I would say, in addition to what he's talking about, because he's right, you do have to make sure that you, which is basically what you're alluding to as well, is like, you can't just throw a bunch of great actors together and be like, all right, act. I mean, that's kind of like the Lucas way of directing, right?
Exactly.
But what gives me hope is Skeleton Crew. Because they pick these kids.
Man. Yes.
They've done some stuff, but nobody is like a marquee name. And yet, I mean, they had the perfect
Phenomenal
chemily.
Yeah.
And so it's there. I mean, obviously, whoever the casting director was, I mean, they did a good job there, so they can.
I think maybe, this is probably need to have a talk with Master Yoda, because I think it's my fear of what, because my thing is, if they hadn't already screwed up the sequel trilogy, I would be okay. But I think because they screwed up the sequel trilogy, they screwed up so many other TV series, and then now you want to touch my beloved, it's like, that is the last stance. That's the thing that's holding all of this up. And so my thing is, if you do a reboot of this and you give me a bunch of crap, like, I'm probably gonna I want to say that in this day and age, never mind, but I'm probably going to have a major conniption, because
I get it.
That's just my thing.
I get it. Here's what you got to look at, though. And this is the big reason why I feel more comfortable having this conversation now, tentatively. Because Kathleen Kennedy is now herself talking about an exit plan. Up until now, it's like, oh, Kathleen Kennedy is going to step down at the end of the, and it was never even a thing. It was just like rumor, wishful thinking, that kind of thing.
All right.
Now she's actually talking about it. Like, yeah, I'm going to be reducing my role. I'm not going to, be that person anymore. Okay. Good.
Yeah, but see, and that's good, but but like I said, the damage has already been done.
Well, it
And
has, but what I'm talking about is okay, so you don't have Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm making this.
true, but what do we get in the console? Like, how do we know this other person who may come in can do it? You know what I mean? And
Right. And I
that's the
mean,
thing.
it's I mean, it's an argument. I mean, look, even Lucas himself screwed up stuff. You just for every
Well, but
skeleton
see,
crew
and
you get an acolyte. I mean, yeah, I know. I understand.
right, and but at least with Lucas though, it's like okay, the worst Lucas was guilty of was pushing technology too far.
Well,
I
and
mean, if you
bad
really start,
directing and horrible dialogue, but yeah.
well, I mean, even in that though, it's like okay, the dialogue may not have been as great, and the only reason why the acting was really bad was because you got too much technology. It was too new for him, so he was just like, "Oh,
Well,
look at all these toys I have, and let me just,
and he's not
I
a
want
good
to."
director.
I
Every
mean,
actor
true.
that's worked with him will tell you he's just
Well,
not.
yeah, I mean, yeah, we all know that. But I guess my whole thing is even in and that's my thing. Like even with him not being a good director, even with him trying to push technology a little bit too far at well, not want to say too far, but doing it too much. Really, if you stop and think about it, like the prequels, you know, weren't really that bad.
Not compared to the sequels.
Yeah. I mean, and I
But if
think
you look at the quality of the prequels versus the original trilogy, it's kind of like
true.
the sequels compared to the prequels. Just like the magic that happened, and I actually think the two things that would have fixed the prequels, first and foremost, don't start Anakin at like 9 years old. Maybe wrap some. And we had this conversation on the show
Yeah.
actually not that long
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah, we
where
sure did.
because we talk about it. Do you do it in the opening crawl? Do you do some flash like montage? Do you maybe do like kind of the young or like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where like the first 30 minutes of the movie, or even the latest Indiana Jones movie, Dial of Destiny. Man, it took me a minute to think of the name.
I even know you're trying to think of.
Yeah,
I thought that was just a pause.
Dial of Destiny, basically, for the first like 20, 30 minutes of the movie, is a 40-year-old Indiana Jones on, this adventure that then sets up him in the modern times. Well, 1950s anyway. So you could have done that with Anakin. Maybe take the the highlights of what you needed to show in a young Anakin, and then go and Attack of the Clones, and that becomes episode 1. Then have something that would have been like a Clone Wars episode for episode 2, and then you have episode 3. I mean, it would have done a lot of things. Number 1, you wouldn't have had to rush trying to show their friendship and brotherhood in episode 3. I mean, the fact that he was able to convey that in one film was admirable, but you really didn't get the gist of it until you saw the Clone Wars series. So I think if they had a movie that was actually just dedicated and it was them showing their friendship, it would have made the whole scenes in episode 3 even more tragic. So that was mistake number 1. The second thing that I would fix, he should have had other people directing the movies, much like what he did with Irvin Kershner and Richard Marquand. And that's why Empire and, Return of the Jedi are so high regarded. Because he controlled the story, but he let the other guys direct. So those two things, man, that would have done it.
To your point about and this, we kind of battled it out, with the whole should he have started as a kid versus not. Now, like I said, I don't think that you're right, and I don't think that you're wrong. I know David probably hates the very words that I'm saying right now because it's very gray of me, but whatever.
Well, you keep fading out because of the noise gate too. So,
Oh well.
I mean, we can hear you. It's just low when you when you get reflective.
Oh, sorry. I'll try not to reflect. So I think that when we talk about the prequel trilogy, I think that you can start Anakin. I think it's pivotal that you start Anakin, that young, because we need to know where he came from. Like, I think there's some things that we need to see. Now, to your point, I don't think we should have had Anakin as prominent in episode one.
There
I
you
think
go.
you could have I think you could have shown the fact that okay, everything could have happened where they got to the pod race thing. And then like once he got to the pod race, he won the pod race. Okay, we see that he has these abilities, he has these reflexes. You give him his moment in the sun, like, okay. And then has to, he leave his mother. Then you take him away to the Jedi Temple and just, leave him there. Once he's like, okay, well, when he's doing like, oh, it's a ship, a cup, a speeder, whatever. Okay, you kind of make it so he stays there. You don't have him hop in some little Naboo fighter and blow up the thing.
Yeah,
and,
I could have.
let's
I
see
would
what
have
this
been.
can do. Like,
Yes.
yeah, that would have been
I would
the
have been
end
totally
of Anakin.
fine with that.
Yeah,
And then
that
no
would have been
Jar Jar.
fine. And then you focus on the rest of like this whole Trade Federation, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's relationship.
Yeah, there
I
you
think
go.
that would have been more pivotal because then now it sets up like you see why Obi-Wan is the way that he is with Anakin come episode 2. And I think that would have been I think you could have made episode 2 a little bit longer in some ways because I think there's some aspects of 2 that
That
I
are rushed.
get, but I think it was a little rushed. Or I think you should have kept Obi-Wan and Anakin together. Like that whole scene when he had to go look for Django and then Anakin had to, but then you wouldn't have, now you have to show how he and Padme form their love and bond. So I get that. I think you have to play with the story in certain spots a little
Yes
bit.
and no, because I mean, going back to what you were saying in episode 1, the whole interaction. I mean, if you actually cut it off to when he's at the Jedi Temple or whatever,
Mhm.
all the Padme stuff would have been intact.
Well, I mean, that's a little kid having puppy love, versus, like, okay, when they're having those moments, because it's funny, I just
yeah.
watched episode 2.
Yeah, you're talking
and
about early in episode 2.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, that's where you really see the love. And he really professes his love for her. He's like, and she's trying to resist it. Like, look, you're trying to be a Jedi. I'm a senator. It just wouldn't work. People be too much in our business. What are we going to sneak around and do? I mean, like that was but even the whole flirting thing that he was doing with her, man. I mean, I kind of loved Anakin's little Riz moment, when he's like giving her the eye and she's like, stop looking at me like that. He's like, what? That whole little, I was like, all right, Anakin got a little game to him. I'm not gonna hold you.
Yeah, but the biggest burn was when she was kind of like, well, you'll always be that little boy I knew in Tatooine.
Man, yes, that was a friend zone moment. I still cringe when I hear that. I'm like, but I respect him though. He did not relent. He still kept going forward, and eventually, even when she tried to, he's like, oh, he's not a Jedi, he's a Padawan. That was another one. I was just like,
yeah,
dude, she's like,
that was the best.
Busting your chops over here, man. But
so, all right, yep, make episode 2 a little longer. That would have been fine. Any of it would have been fine, and then take Jar Jar out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like completely out.
Exactly. He's irrelevant.
Yep. All right. Speaking of irrelevance, David says, "Is the original cast too unique to cast believably?"
Recast believably.
Yeah, and I mean, I get where he's coming from, with this, and it's a legitimate question, especially since he's newer, right? I mean,
100%.
Because we always talk about it, and if you're newer, especially now, we live in an age now where everything's rebooted.
Yeah.
They're about to reboot Naked Gun with Liam Neeson. That trailer's out. Yeah.
Oh my God. What?
Yeah. Go punch it up on YouTube, man.
I will after this show. I have to see this.
Sam basically sent it to me. He was on vacation last week. You sent it, and I'm like, at first I thought it was like a joke. I thought it was like a meme or something, something that people think. But then I'm like, oh wait, is this real? It's real.
Wow. But like even like the Karate Kid stuff, like
Sure.
we're about to get, that's I don't want to say it's a reboot, but we've kind of had they kind of did it with Jackie Chan as basically Miyagi, just call him Mr. Han, and then you have uh, uh, Will Smith's son as Dre. You know, he's basically the new Daniel. But
Yeah, and here's what's interesting about that. What's weird about that was that's kind of what it was supposed to be, right? Like you're just rebooting it, like
yeah,
retelling the story, but in a different thing. And now this year, they're
right, they're
bringing
coming
Daniel
back.
into it. So now
Yeah.
it's actually like a really that Karate Kid remake, quote unquote, is really nothing more than a continuation. It was really
Hmm.
now, as we see, more of a sequel,
Right.
to next Karate Kid. I mean, you can almost look at it. David will love this. Basically, what they've done by making this
Tokyo
movie,
Drift.
yes,
Yep.
yep, they basically made the Karate Kid version of Tokyo Drift.
Hmm.
That's basically what it is. Or if you're a horror fan, Paranormal Activity. What was that one that took place like in Mexico or something? Um, oh man, it was
Yeah, I didn't watch.
good
I didn't
too.
really keep up with the paranormals.
Man, that one was really good, but it was like an offshoot. Like it had nothing to do with any of the characters, any of the lore, none of that. It was just, okay, here's the same thing, but it's happening to this other family. It was really good. It was actually one of the best in the series.
Mm.
Because of Paranormal Activity, all the odd number ones are fantastic. The even number ones are just okay. I can't really say there's a bad one in the bunch, but 1, 3, 5, which I think is that one, and 7 are incredible. But that's what I think that they were doing. And again, you can do a similar thing in Star Wars. Because again, I mean, with your point where you're saying, okay, why don't we just reboot the sequel trilogy? That's something else that we've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Where they're kind of, it's too soon, unfortunately. I mean, unless you pull a world between worlds thing, and
I mean,
you're gonna.
it's been 10 years
Well,
already.
now yeah. I mean, but at the time that because everybody was talking about it, like after the Last Jedi came out,
Yep.
and
I'm
then
like, you know
shortly
what?
after Rise of Skywalker came out, people were talking about that. So it was on people's minds. You're right. There has been enough time and enough damage that if they went back and said, okay, you know what, we're doing the Timothy Zahn trilogy now, I think everybody would be on board. I don't think anybody would even care.
Mhm.
It wouldn't be that bad. Now, the problem is you would either have to recast the original characters or de-age them. If you de-age them, it would cost a lot of money, and you'd have to recast Carrie Fisher anyway.
Right.
So there is that.
Yeah, I'm willing to, like I said, I'm willing to concede that if you redid the original trilogy, it really makes me nervous. That's all. Because I feel like that's the only thing that's really, you know, it's kind of like the force. It's
Holding it
binding us
together.
together. Yeah, it's really the thing that's holding it all together. And if you don't, I mean, that's something you absolutely have to get right. Because granted, you can always use. I mean, the great thing is that James Earl Jones, gave his blessing that you can continue to use his voice for more Vader stuff. So, thank you, posthumously, Mr. Jones, for that. But then, you still have Yoda, this Frank Oz. Um, I mean, do you just keep? I mean, you could just CG Yoda and then just use Frank Oz's voice, especially if you don't change any of the dialogue. If you just kept all the dialogue what it is and the story or what it is, you just recast the characters and fix some of the plot holes or plot points like you said with the lightsabers or make the um certain things pop more.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
look,
I get
even
that.
stuff as simple as Leia kissing Luke. You know, everybody forgets that happened because at the time he wrote that,
Right.
Leia wasn't his sister. Luke wasn't
Right.
even Vader's son. It was the whole
Right.
thing before Empire. Like, it was actually very late in Empire when he pivoted and made it, instead of Vader killing Anakin, Vader was Anakin. So he did kill him from a certain point of, stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
things that changed dramatically while he was writing it, and then also the technology that was limiting things that he wanted to do.
See, I think what would be cool and funny. I think you should leave that in there. I think you should leave the kiss in there just because it's part
I
of
mean, you
like
can,
Star Wars,
sure, because they
Star
didn't
Wars
know.
humor.
Yeah, I mean,
But what I think should happen.
that was just
You
an
know that scene in
example.
that scene in Return of the Jedi when Luke, tells Leia that, my sister has it and blah 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 blah, and she's like, your father, and she realizes that she's not only are they brother and sister, but then Vader's their dad.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in.
That's a lot to take in at one moment. So when Han comes up and says like, hey, what's wrong? And she's like, I can't tell you. And he's like, oh, but you can tell Luke, like, look, listen, I just found out that I just kissed my brother like 2 months ago. I'm processing this. I think that would be hilarious, but that's just me and my humor. But I think they should probably, you can still do that. And if you want to take that part out, man, it's no biggie. It's not like it's a huge, plot device or whatever that you need in the film per se.
There's somebody that's going to argue that's like the foundation. Like, that's
Right,
the
exactly.
moment.
Like, we need
It's
that
the
kiss,
pivotal
man.
moment in the saga.
Right. But I think if you kept the dialogue, if you kept the of course the tone, the music, you can CGI Yoda, you can use James Earl Jones's voice for Vader, and you still have Tarkin. CG has come far enough from Rogue One that now you can do a better version of Tarkin.
Well, and by the time they conceivably do it, too, right?
Right, and Tarkin wasn't featured that heavily in it anyway.
Right, yeah.
So, he only had like a couple of scenes.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you could do that.
And that's if they wanted to use the original people. I mean, again, you could completely recast everything. I mean, sure, you got to keep James Earl Jones's voice as Vader. You got to keep Frank Oz's voice as Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
Those are non-negotiable. I would even argue you need to keep Anthony Daniels' voice as C-3PO.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
And I'm sure he's tripping over himself to give permission to use his likeness and voice.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he's the only one that's been in virtually every Star Wars project.
film. Yep.
So, but again, I don't necessarily think this is something that is going to be, nor does it need to be done right away. They could focus on, going back to the old Republic. They could, there's a lot that they could still do. If they want to do that, they can maybe even, if they wanted to sort of brush without having to get too deep into, like original trilogy land or whatever, they could do a Plagueis Palpatine thing. Talk about the origin of that. They could do a whole bounty hunter thing. They could do a criminal underground thing similar to like Lucas's thing, which is funny. I was reading some about it. I don't think I sent it to you either. But they were talking, it was like one of the guys that was involved with Lucas doing the prequel trilogy, and then he was working with them on that Star Wars Underground thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, man, we could not do this show. And one of the reasons why it didn't was because the cheapest, like he figured out the total budget, the cheapest he could get it down to per episode was $40 million.
Jeez.
Per episode.
Wow. Wow.
Now, I mean, granted, this is back in like the mid 2000s, late 2000s.
I want to say it was like what? I thought it was
well, it was
like 06, 07?
Yeah, it was like around there because remember the Clone Wars was supposed to premiere first, and then that. And they were
Yeah.
knocking around the idea of doing this live action thing. Because remember, the Disney sale happened in 2012. So it was like the late 2000s, early 10s, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So now conceivably, technology is a little bit cheaper. You got AI. You could probably do it cheaper, but yeah. But again, they could do something like that, right? They can have all the criminal organizations, the Hutts, Crimson Dawn, Black Sun. I mean, I'd be 100% on board for that. To me, that whole thing is infinitely fascinating. You can even look if you want to get your lightsaber jollies off. You can always have Maul in there because he was the leader of Crimson Dawn. So that gives you a little bit of that Jedi Sith connection. So there's ways that they can go. Like there's things that they can do.
Sure.
And stay away from the Skywalker saga proper. Let's put it like that.
I think that's what I mean. I think that ultimately what needs to happen. But I think what needs to also, if you're going to talk about a reboot, though, like if we're just solidly talking about a reboot, it makes me incredibly nervous.
Well, and I don't think it
With
should be done anytime soon, and I don't necessarily think it should be done by a Disney-led Lucasfilm either.
right,
There's also rumors going around that Disney might sell Lucasfilm.
yeah, that's true.
So that's something I think could be done after you establish some of this more ancillary stuff. After Kathleen Kennedy, at the very least, steps down. There's a lot of things that you can do. And again, it's funny because if you actually read the article that we're basing our whole show on, where did it
Gaming
come
Bible.
from?
Gaming Bible.
Okay, Gaming Bible, because I was like, it wasn't a Screen Rant thing.
No.
But if you base it on, if you look at that article, they weren't even talking about rebooting the trilogies or anything. What they're talking about rebooting is like restarting the franchise, but in a different direction.
Right.
Like staying away from the Skywalker thing. But to me, whenever you start using the phrase reboot, you gotta. And look, this is a viable option. I mean, this is one thing that they could do. And again, I don't mean to suggest, before everybody piles on me in the comments, I don't mean to suggest that they should do this, starting in like 2027 or something.
Right.
This is something that I think they would have to do a couple of things. Number one, you'd have to go down. Maybe, you're talking like 2035, 2040.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, at that time, they might have destroyed the brand so much. And then,
Right.
even better, because then it's a new movie to whoever that generation is, because it's almost like the Jedi. Nobody knows about Star Wars. Well, I thought Star Wars was a myth. No, it was actually a film series and, that kind of thing.
Right.
All right, well, I guess let us know what you guys are thinking. David let us know. Ted let us know. But you guys have to let us know. So let us know, of course, in the comments section what you guys want to see. Do you want to see like a full-on reboot of the prequels and original trilogy and sequels? Do you want to see like something in the vein of the Old Republic, the High Republic, maybe some unrelated story with brand new characters, kind of like what the Rian Johnson trilogy is supposed to be? Let us know what you guys are thinking. And then, of course, as we always have to do, because, we're YouTubers, so that means if we're on YouTube, we're also on Twitch, by the way. But with YouTube, you got to tell everybody to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, which is especially true with us, because you never know when we're going to be live lately. I mean, we try to do it Sunday and or sometimes Monday, but sometimes the time gets away just because of the schedules, and we just can't go full time yet. You guys have to help us with that. A couple other things, we have that entertainment show that we were talking about. We created the YouTube channel for it. It's going to be called Entertainment Showdown. There's no videos on it yet. You can subscribe to it. And we'll be starting that soon. Don't have a date yet. Don't have a time frame, but it's going to be soon. We're really making headway on that now, so We're going to be doing it. Before, we kept talking about it. Now we're actually doing it. And then, of course, like this video, because it does help the algorithm put this video in front of a lot of other people that, like you guys, might enjoy being part of this community. All right? So with that, we'll get some polls up. Be sure to participate in those as it relates to the show tonight. And we'll see you guys on the next one. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Saunders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.